All right, here we are. I've been trying to keep the buzzword of the year under wraps the entire day, but I think we're about to unleash Pandora's box and talk about our favorite topic, artificial intelligence. So let's start off with speaker intros and the icebreaker. If you guys, as you introduce yourself, after you introduce yourselves, answer the following question. The thought of privacy in AI fills you with hope or dread. Pick one. I stole that from Reid Hoffman, by the way, so just giving him attribution.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Anjali Gugle. I work at Cisco Systems in the data strategy, leading data governance by design, and I'm also the product security officer for signing all the images. And the icebreaker question is, AI is a dread or hope? So I would be on the borderline. It's a combination, depends on how you use it. If it can be a dread, if don't use it wisely.
I'm Gabe Ledeen. Most recently been head of privacy at Brex. Previously, privacy and product counsel at Facebook and Cruise. Dread or hope? I'll go with hope. I've got 3 young kids, so the prospect that transformational technology fills me with dread, I think, is depressing. So I think hope in that. I think there's a ton of capabilities that are going to be unleashed, and perhaps a lot of the drudgery of day-to-day life and work that we experience now will be alleviated and ameliorated by this technology.
Hi, I'm Shannon, a privacy attorney for many years, and now I run Intuit's Responsible AI program. I'm on the fence. I agree with everything you just said, but I'm also a little nervous about some foreign governments in this space. That scares me. So I'll leave it with that.
Why just foreign?
Oh, fair enough.
Right.
Hi, I'm John. I am the legal lead for AI at LinkedIn. I was also previously a privacy attorney. I mean, I'm still a privacy attorney. I just focus on AI right now. As far as the question goes, I think the technology gives me hope, but I think the way that we're going to use it fills me with a bit of dread. So I'll split the baby there.
Very well said. There are so many amazing applications of AI that give me hope, but like you said, it's how we use it and how we build it, the types of data that we input into it, and whether we do that in a way that is privacy preserving and the way we train the models that I'm still on the fence on, like Shannon. So with that, I'd love to kick off the discussion by talking about the specific privacy challenges that you guys are seeing in AI. We started these conversations over lunch, but given the work that you've been doing in tech, you're in the forefront, and the advice and work that you've been giving your clients, I'd love for you to share your own experiences about, what are the biggest privacy threats out there when it comes to AI?
I can start, I guess. I mean, I think so one thing I think is obvious to everyone, but I'll say it anyway. The overall, like machine learning, artificial intelligence, it's not new, right? I mean, it's not something that just appeared when OpenAI made its announcement about ChatGPT, right? Like, it's been around for quite a while. Companies and individuals and academic institutions and governments have been using it for years and years and years for a variety of reasons. So I think that's just like as a baseline. It's been around for a long time. So I think it's really important to identify what is actually new and what, therefore, is worth really sort of focusing on and doing a new assessment on. And to me, I think one of the things that's really new is how accessible it is to anyone with even a shred of interest in trying it out. It's so easy to, and now there are a variety of providers. It's just so easy to get online and try unbelievably powerful technologies. So I think just the novelty of that, how new it is, and how new it is to the public in particular, presents some new challenges in terms of transparency. So transparency is the one that I'm really focused on at the moment. So when you're at an enterprise that's leveraging another company's platform, you want to be able to do pretty decent risk assessment of it if you don't know, and they aren't really telling you much about how it was developed in particular. Your assessment's going to be inherently limited. So I think transparency is the biggest one for me.
Yeah, I'll jump off of that. I mean, I think when we say AI right now, what we're talking about is what people were calling machine learning until ChatGPT, and before that, I think they called it, big data and then data science, and it's the same thing in some respects, right? Like, I mean, generative AI is a new type of AI. It's a new kind of data processing. The way I think about it is pretty similar. I think transparency is key. I think explainability is the other one. And I think about it in the sense that, generative AI has the potential to create new risks, new harms, new potential uses, though, positive uses. The challenge is really explaining it. I think that we've done a much better job in the tech industry of explaining some of the other kinds of AI, like a recommendation algorithm or some kind of search algorithm or things like that. I mean, algorithms and machine learning and AI are all around us, and they have been for decades. But we just generally, I think, understood them better in the past, and I think that's one of the challenges we're facing right now is like, how do you explain, 175 billion parameter, model that I don't think the people who even built it understand. Like, if you look at like the system card for GPT-4, it's 60 pages of risk analysis, and nowhere in there do they exactly say how the model works in any meaningful respect. And so I think that's like one of the biggest challenges. We have an idea of what it is, but it's this sort of nebulous thing where that idea actually changes over time. Like ChatGPT and other large language models do change over time, and what may be true in one release may not be true in another, and keeping the public informed about what that means and what that looks like and how that acts for them is critically important. Because I think one thing that's key is to not segregate like the technology from the use case in which it's deployed, right? I mean, like a predictive model may be great in terms of recommending someone you connect with on Facebook or LinkedIn. It's not great when it's recommending, say, a jail sentence or when it's making a determination of creditworthiness, particularly if you don't have any visibility into what's happening.
So as Gabe said, right, that OpenAI, generative AI is definitely new, it's gaining momentum. And what we are seeing is that the power of the foundational models is being used. But what I worry is that the memorization of the models is going to really affect the way people can query the data, reconstruct the queries, so the adversaries can really benefit from the power which generative AI is going to give them. So again, self-regulation is not failing, but I would say the regulatory bodies really need to worry about that. They need to worry about the repercussions, and organizations have to recalibrate the policies to make sure they account for responsible AI, which will definitely provide explainability, fairness, and trust and transparency together. So all these qualities which researchers have really captured and say trustworthy AI or trustworthy governance will really have to move from on paper to actual controls to really make sure that generative AI is safe.
These models, particularly generative AI models, large language models, the recent research has shown that the size of the data really matters for performance. And and not only that, but research also shows that it's better performance to have a very large model that's fine-tuned rather than to specific tasks, rather than building small models for specific tasks. And so I think in terms of democratization, we're going to continue to see the production of very, very, very large models that are being produced. There's only a few companies that have the know-how to do this and have the means to do this, including access to the compute power that's necessary to do that, which means that only a privileged few will be able to actually build the foundations that every other technology is going to rest upon. And so I think that's really, really important to consider. And it's not a mistake that this technology is being built in the United States, because there's more data about English speakers in the United States on the internet than anywhere else on the globe. And in order for these models to be accessible and used by other populations, including other countries or other continents, that same level of data needs to be collected about those individuals. At the same time, we're also seeing explorations into robotics, into computer vision, and in order for those systems to work, there also needs to be a collection of data, substantial amounts of data. So there is now a discussion about how to collect data at scale about everything in the human race. So not just about things on the internet, but also about weather, about the way that we see the world, the way that we interact with each other, sensory information, emotional information, information about your health, and all of this data is going to be used to create these large models at scale. And so I think right now, we're just beginning to see a peak of when companies are gonna start massively collecting data, and also collecting data in populations and other continents where people may not have the same types of controls or same types of education in order to have control over their personal information.
Couple of points on that. One, I think you're right to a certain extent. I mean, we're going to need more data. If you look at like OpenAI's GPT-4, I mean, they basically took everything that's out there for purposes of training, right? I mean, like 175 billion data points is a lot. One thing that I think is fascinating, though, is that technologists are now saying that we're kind of at the point of like peak data for AI. Like we're running out of stuff that we could train on. We could create more. I wonder, though, if the creation of more data is for purposes of essentially prompting models, or if it's going to be for developing. Because one thing that's super, super fascinating is if you look at like the Hugging Face repositories, where it's an open source, essentially GitHub for AI models, the current best performing model is trained on far fewer parameters than any GPT model, and it was produced by a research institution out of Dubai. It's called Falcon, and it outperforms things by Facebook, by Google, by OpenAI. And so what I think we're actually seeing is this, I guess, democratization to a certain degree of some of the models. But what that means, though, in terms of, to your other point about everybody else in the world is going to be subject to potentially data collection about them and processing, is going to be really fascinating to see. Because it's one thing if a model's developed in the EU or in the United States, it's another thing if it's developed in Dubai or in China potentially, or some other country. So that's, I think, particularly concerning.
Well, that's depressing. So I want to turn it around a little bit. We know, I mean, all of us here, most of us here are privacy professionals, so we are very good at issue spotting privacy challenges in different types of technology, including AI. So I want to move on the conversation to what each of the speaker here, given the work that you're doing, in terms of what you think are parts of the solutions when it comes to solving privacy problems in the context of AI. What are some of the things that you guys are suggesting or pushing your companies to do, to consider when it comes to problem solving in this space?
So what I consider is data privacy is part of data governance as a whole, because data governance will essentially track the flow of data, the journey of data, right from acquisition to publishing that data. So taking privacy, and as Shannon said, right, move it to embrace data democratization, improve the data literacy, and give the ownership of the data back to the data creators. So the creators very well know about their data. Is it PII? Is it sensitive? What's the context? What's the purpose? So move from the centralized data architecture to a data mesh inspired architecture, and then create privacy as a feature or a tenet of data products, or even create maybe confidential data meshes. So that's the way I look at privacy, is make it part of data mesh, a tenet of data product.
I have a few ideas. I mean, one is we could treat data, particularly personal data, more like we would treat traditionally construed IP in the process of training models, right? I mean, for example, like if you're in licensing a bunch of data sets, I mean, query what rights any individuals in those data sets have, outside of GDPR and other things, for awareness or knowledge of what their data is being used for. I think that if, for instance, if the persons who were in those data sets were treated as if they were rights holders under IP law, that might be a different kind of outcome. One interesting thing we've seen, I've seen at a few companies, and there are actually vendors out there that are supplying this, and I think it's super, super fascinating, and I think more companies should probably do it, is what they call in the AI space delexicalization. So essentially for a data set that has, say, individuals' names and email addresses or phone numbers and things like that, you essentially would replace that data in the context with a semantic equivalent, so it preserves the state of meaning of the data, right? So instead of like John Adams, it would say like, name. Instead of my phone number, it would have like phone number. And so you can train the data and you can tune models using that data in a way that doesn't actually necessarily reveal the data that's actually underlying what you're trying to understand. And so those actually can be fairly effective in terms of not hindering the performance of models, but can be pretty effective in preserving privacy, at least for people whose data has been obfuscated in that manner.
So I agree with that. We do that, and I think there's a lot of research in that space too, which is really cool. But I don't know if that's like going far enough. Like I'm curious.
I'm not saying it's going far enough, but I'm saying it's something that can be
Because
done, yeah.
I think, so something that I'm so curious about, everyone in this room's thought about this. My personal thought is that a lot of the traditional privacy regime, in terms of thinking about data as like a way to have transparency and then a way to have control over like particular data fields and maybe how they're used or how they're shared, like completely fails in AI, like in the context of AI. Because you don't need to have the data at that level in order to make predictions about someone or to survey them or to like influence things in their life. Mm-hmm. And so there's part of me that thinks like there needs to be almost like a fundamental overhaul of like what are we trying to accomplish from a privacy perspective. And I think like philosophically, like what is necessary for humans to feel a sense of security in a privacy space, and write legislation, and also I think probably work with industry to figure out tools to do that, because I think the privacy regime is only going to go so far.
So two things. One, I think, actually they kind of merge into one, so I'll just do one. I think my sort of high level thought on this is that in general, privacy is not the most important risk when we're talking about AI. It may not even be in the top three. But that said, it is probably the one that's most familiar to most people. And it's the one for which there are already identified dedicated regulators with enforcement authorities and enforcement experience. And it is pretty darn mushy, I think we'd all agree. So it's susceptible to redefinition and expansion. So it turns out, I think, and this is what a lot of us are dealing with right now, is like it is subject to, it's really malleable, and it could be stretched, to cover a lot of these other sort of more significant risks, I think, that are stemming from the development of these sophisticated AI tools. It doesn't need to be. I don't think it does sort of does so naturally, and I think that there are some significant costs to that, including most privacy professionals are already very busy and under-resourced. Also, largely not trained in issue spotting for non-privacy risks. And so lack the expertise really to effectively counsel on these more substantial risks. So I think a lot of this, to me, when dealing with AI related risks, has caused me to approach from a cross-functional perspective, and I think that's one of the big takeaways that I would encourage people to bring with them home today is, like, it's not a privacy problem. It's definitely not exclusively a privacy problem. It's probably not even mostly a privacy problem. So in addressing AI risks, you should try and build cross-functional teams of stakeholders and experts in different domains that can help and supplement what you're bringing from the privacy perspective.
I love that. So I'm hearing three things so far. I heard privacy tech from two of you. I'm hearing more, standards and regulations. And then the third one, Gabe, that you mentioned is more of like a cross-functional approach, so that we're not just focusing on privacy problems, because there are other important problems to think about, which, we've seen that in privacy, right? Like, there are data governance problems that we internally work with cross-functional teams in IT and the CISO and the ethics and the CDO and the CIO. And so I'm curious, like, when it comes to problem solving, I'm going to take it a step further. When it comes to problem solving in a cross-functional way, are you guys coming up with new ways to do that? Are you leveraging existing committees or governance boards internally? How are you approaching that when it comes to AI?
Okay, I'll jump in. So it's, I mean, first, +1 to everything that Gabe just said. I mean, I think he's exactly right. I think that the most meaningful privacy problems relating to AI are problems that most of us who are not actually working in the AI development space we're not going to be the ones who are solving those problems or necessarily dealing with them. I think our privacy challenges are often in the application of AI tools to particular processing use cases, right? So not does GPT-4 have a privacy problem per se, like, say every regulator under the sun is looking into, but is our use of GPT-4, assuming that it is somewhat kosher for, data processing purposes, is that use going to be perpetuating some kind of privacy problem? With respect to governance, I think there's a lot of similarity between privacy and data protection and AI. It's some of the same mental muscles, right? To Gabe's point, you have to be, cross-functional. You got to bring in people who understand data, who understand law, who understand engineering, product. You have to bring in people who know how to do it across different subject matter domains, like employee privacy versus product privacy, things like that. You have to think about documentation, like just like you would do a risk assessment in the AI space to assess, potential risks and harms. That kind of information would feed in naturally to like a data protection impact assessment. So there's a lot of like dovetails between the work that you've probably already done in the privacy space and what you'll need to do for responsible AI or AI governance, but it is slightly different. The laws are different, to Gabe's point. The risks are different. But I think some of the mental models for how to go about solving them are probably pretty similar.
I was just going to say, I've been leveraging the same structures, essentially, but might be some different people in the room.
So the way I look at it is definitely the generative AI wave is there. And whoever really comes out with a plan or a traction with the right strategy gets to direct the narrative, right? Be part of the narrative. So what is the narrative? Today we have generative AI, tomorrow we may have spatial computing or something else, right? So the core of the problem still exists. AI was there before that, big data was there. A lot of deluge of data was coming. So the way I look at it, look at the principles, the objectives, like you need to have fairness, explainability, trust, transparency, security, risk assessment, mitigation, everything, because you want to have a better consumer experience. So to satisfy all these properties, you need a framework, you need core controls, and these core controls can be really extracted from all the different laws, regulations, attestations, certifications, NIST guidelines together, and then create the common control baseline. And I'm pretty sure that any new regulation or any new technology, these dimensions of technology, regulation, and controls will evolve, but it will at least solve 60 to 70% of problem, because end result is you want to have a safer world, a safer place for people, right? People and the community, and even for protect the IP of different products and services. So with a baseline control which satisfied most of these properties across these different traits would help us to do better than what we are doing now.
Shannon, as someone who used to focus on privacy and now the bulk of your work is on responsible AI, I guess I want to hear your answer to that question. What are some of the things that maybe you still leverage, or some of the new things that you've had to build in place that because the existing privacy frameworks or structures that you had built in the past are no longer serving you in your broader role?
We do have new dedicated structures, but I agree that they mirror very similarly like what I would say like a more mature privacy program looks like. So we do have a governance steering committee at the highest level of the company with a diverse set of executives who help us triage and set our kind of North Star to make sure everything that we're developing fits within our values. We do have a cross-collaborative group of people that are working through all of the various elements, and I do think our review process mirrors, in terms of functionality, very similar to like a DPIA process.
Okay.
The one thing that I think is more difficult is that some of the issues, and thank you for raising this, Gabe, some of the issues that I think are the issues that are top of mind from an AI perspective are harder to solve. or do not have solutions, and we cannot solve them just our organization. And so
Right.
it requires a lot of coordination with our stakeholders, including policymakers, as well as industry, and a lot of research. And I think there's also some conversations about, what does it mean to have appropriate round of risk taking so that we can still innovate, but innovate, smartly
Responsibly.
and responsibly, and always keeping our customers' values in mind. And that can be a challenge sometimes too.
Right. So you said new leaders, new stakeholders. I mean, we've worked with privacy, security, data governance, ethics, the CIO. Are there other trust and safety? Are there other personas that play a big role that we haven't named here or identified here?
The CTO,
Yeah.
head of AI,
Right.
our AI organization, is like a key partner.
And that's usually under the CTO.
And at our organization it is, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have 10 minutes for audience questions if anyone wants to come up and ask their question about this topic. But if anyone wants to add something in the meantime,
It was implied in what I heard, and it looks like there's a discussion. If we stick to data, especially in the context of privacy, why do we care what this algorithm or the other algorithm does if it's explainable or not explainable? Just as you said, it's really, is it fit for purpose? And somebody who uses it needs to decide if it delivers value. If we're protecting data, aren't we done and good? Because the data we deliver to any algorithm, that's really the real asset. Before it was all about algorithms. Now we're back to it's all about data. And if we protect data, well, who cares what a ChatGPT 17 is going to do? If we didn't expose anything and the use case works, are we good?
I guess
Yeah, who wants to go
I'll start. Maybe. I mean, I think there are a couple of assumptions kind of bundled into the question. Assuming we do everything right, do we need to care about the output? I think, the assuming we do everything right piece is on us. And then if there's somebody else who can handle what about the output, then great, we are done. If there isn't, I think part of the question for the community and for, our employers is like who's the one, or who are those who are sort of dealing with the downstream effects or issues. But I would agree with you that from a purely privacy perspective, if we're a third party, like a downstream user of a tool, and we, work through our process as, we've defined it already, then yeah, I think that's largely true. Like, it's about the data, it's about the process. We're thinking about the data subjects' rights. We're thinking about, have we done our risk assessment? Have we documented, what are our obligations in terms of consent if we have them? What's the most sensitive data? What are the third parties involved? What's their level of access? All those sort of typical questions that we walk through in these types of scenarios. So that's right. But right, I think the big question then is like, well, okay, then who's the one who's worrying about things like liability, accuracy, vulnerable populations, misinformation, government access and manipulation, or all those types of on and on and on, copyright, IP issues. I mean, you could run down the parade of horribles, but if there is nobody else identified, and like small and even medium-sized companies, oftentimes there isn't somebody else who's thinking about those things and capable of addressing them, then I think by default, like, we're the one who's already working through part A of this problem set. I don't think it's responsible to hand it off to nobody and just say like, look, I'm good. I don't know about you, but that's kind of where I'm done. So.
Yeah, I mean, big plus one to that. I mean, I think it's also a question of like, which side of the model are you talking about? Are you talking about developing the model, right? Like, I mean, okay, maybe if we can annotate the data and we know what it all is and we have the rights to do everything with it. I mean, and keeping in mind, like, you know, we're talking about a variety of different algorithms. You know, there's a lot of focus on large language models, which essentially, I mean, again, are based on neural nets that are essentially self-programming. And so the ability to necessarily convey to someone what that processing is in order for them to, you know, agree to it is kind of nebulous to begin with. I think that's one side. And then the other is, to Gabe's point, like, okay, how are we using the AI? A lot of times the people who are using the AI may not know what data went into it in the first place, and I think that's a disconnect that's oftentimes forgotten. Most companies that are using third-party commercial services for AI purposes don't know how that data was used. They don't know what the data was. And many times the people who are developing AI services don't want to reveal what the data is because it might enable people to reverse engineer their models and do things with it. Particularly, and this goes into like the question of like open versus closed model ecosystems, and there's a lot of literature about this, but the more open a model is and the more transparent they are with respect to their data and how the model is trained, the more these other risks that Gabe mentioned seep in, like digital safety risks, IP risks, and things like that start to become more prominent as a result of that, so.
I would say we don't need your personal information to build a model that can make predictions about you.
Yep.
So locking down your personal information may not actually like have that same protection as I think some people may think it does. So that's one thing. I would also say there are certain use cases where explainability is legally required in the financial space, in the employment space. And so I think it's really important, at least for those use cases, like if you tell someone that they can't have a loan or they can't have a job, like there does need to be some level of explainability of why that decision was made, at least to that individual. That individual deserves like something that they can contest or something that they can understand. And so without that sort of flexibility, I think there may, at least today, be some use cases where certain types of AI may not be appropriate unless we have more research into explainability and how decisions were made and why.
What I personally think is that there are two parts to this particular ideal use case. The reason I call it ideal is that you have your PII, you're protecting that PII, and it's fit for purpose. But there is a data management aspect of it and the privacy operation aspect of it. Okay, you are protecting the data, but have you really, is there limitation on the data? Is there data minimization? And is that data used along with other data to make decisions, right? So if you're making decisions about that data, then that data is used in combination, so there is a linkage involved. And then how are you testing that data? Is it diverse enough to make sure that you're not impacting the decisions of a particular group? So only using that data, definitely yes, you can have 100% protection. But normally the data is used for the purpose, intended purpose, but for additional use cases, especially for in the AI world to be competitive for decision making. So it's management and operations, but you need synthetic data or testing. And there is what AI comes into picture, and it can screw the results.
And just quickly before we get Jason, the assumption of like assuming we did everything right when it comes to privacy in building this AI tool is such a huge assumption that we're seeing isn't the case in most of the use cases out there. Like we're seeing, the problems pop up because privacy wasn't part of the development. Or, privacy by design, one of the most important tenets in our profession, wasn't practiced in developing that tool. So with that, Jason?
Yeah, so I'm happy to see the panelists address one of my pet peeves, which is the focus of privacy on confidentiality, right? There are other issues in privacy specifically which AI affects, which is autonomy and decision making, right? So it's not about the data, and it's not about the confidentiality of data, it's about the downstream effects. So I want to present somewhat of an anecdote that I think is interesting. Raise your hand if you've heard of Eliza, the early chatbot that simulated a psychologist. Okay, so a few of you. For some of you who don't, it was an early program developed in 1966 by a gentleman at MIT named Joseph Weizenbaum. And it simulated a psychologist conversation, and people were like, oh my God, it understands what I'm thinking and how, about me. 1966. So Joseph Weizenbaum went on to write a book called Computer Power and Human Reason in 1976. And my dad used to work in speech recognition at Carnegie Mellon University. Well, Joseph Weizenbaum came and spoke, and my dad went and got him to sign his copy of the book. And here's what he wrote in my dad's signed copy. May you never succeed at getting a computer to understand speech.
Any reactions from our speakers?
Yeah, I mean, the machines are still trying to convince people they're alive. I don't know. I mean, I caution everybody to read with many heapings of salt all of the reports out there about sentience, about singularity, about anything about some kind of like artificial general intelligence being right around the corner. I think we're a little bit away from that, but I think that it sells clicks. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That was great. I would just say I don't think the machine understands really anything.
Exactly.
It's very confident usually, but it's not. It's just predictive in nature.
With that, we do have a couple of minutes. If no one has any questions, I'd love to ask each speaker to share any call to action or anything that you would want to leave the audience, something to ponder, some resource that you think would be beneficial or helpful for them to turn to when it comes to thinking about the broader AI space, but also when it comes to thinking about privacy in the age of AI.
Yeah, I'll just say this isn't unique to AI, but I've been feeling it more lately. Just because I think, like, even my immediate family, who tend to be pretty tech savvy and engaged, have been very confused and alarmed by a lot of things. So, in general, I've been working in tech for a while, over a decade now, and I think that with a few exceptions, the industry generally does a real disservice to people who are not what I would describe as like optimal users. I think a lot of people get left behind and excluded by technological advancement, including older people, younger people, people with different kinds of cognitive issues, disabilities, like sensory issues. So I just encourage everybody to just, like, to the extent that you can, think about those people in your day-to-day work. Remember that they're people too, and they're trying to use these products just as much as anybody else, and ought to be considered in the development of the new technologies and need to be brought along with us.
I strongly believe that there is no AI without data, and you can make wonders with data with the right innovation and technology. So this audience here is it's a perfect opportunity to really believe that we can together, be part of the narrative to build technology with the proper innovation to improve not only privacy tech, but everything around the data, governance, security, compliance, audit, risk, and engineering as well, to create a safer environment, improve trust, and then provide transparency. So definitely it's data, innovation, technology, and marching towards a safer goal.
Second everything that you both said. I would also just note, like, your voice matters. Your voice matters, like, not just because everyone here are innovators, but because you're also consumers. And so speak up, reach out to policyholders, reach out to industry groups, you can reach out to me personally if you see something that calls to my attention. And then also, if you're running privacy programs in your company, or if you're running innovation programs in your company, I would recommend fostering a dialogue with your workers. That's the one thing that I've seen the most positive feedback about, that our workers are really happy that executives are taking these issues into consideration, that we're beginning to build principles, that we're beginning to build frameworks about it, and that we're being really responsible and very thoughtful about the decisions we make. And I would encourage you to have those conversations too.
plus one to all of that. And the one last thing I would say is that, you know, we've mentioned it multiple times. ChatGPT came out about 6 months ago. This current craze about AI, both on the regulatory as well as the business side, has been around for maybe a year or so. We're pretty early on in this. And so to the extent that you want to be more involved, to the extent you want to have more of a say, to the extent you want to lean in and help shape this, like, and what happens with AI and what happens with privacy in AI, it's a pretty good time to do it. You know, I mean, the best day was yesterday, but today is second best. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here, and so I think that, you know, it's a good time to lean in and seize it.
Amen. At Troped, our specific call is to innovate in privacy as we innovate in AI. You know, we're used to deploying new emerging technologies without much thought when it comes to privacy. So we have, like, it's very early times when it comes to AI. So, you know, we can build privacy tech, we can innovate in privacy when it comes to this space, and we have the tools. We know, you know, we understand privacy by design. We have a robust privacy engineering profession that has emerged in the last 5 years, and so that's our call. I do love, in particular, Gabe's point about reaching across the, you know, across organizations and working with others, because this isn't something that we can solve in a siloed way. I mean, that's the Troped way, right? Like, we break down silos between founders and investors and the actual users and buyers. We need to do the same when it comes to AI in general. And with that, we're gonna break out for our last round table and continue the discussion on this topic